I'm aware of the fact that the primary audience for these recordings is the younger people, younger than you and me, Anne. So I suppose what that did for me, it put me in mind of where I was at, when I was a lot younger than I am now, and what was helpful to me then. This continued to help me to this day. That's really the way that my mind went with this. And what I remembered was I left school when I was 16, which for me would be probably one of the first examples of me following my own wisdom, because on paper, I could have continued. I could have done A-levels. I was bright enough to do that, but something in me wasn't interested in that and was more interested in something else. I wasn't even quite sure what that was, but I couldn't find anything that was compelling in the A-level subjects or what that seemed to be leading towards. So I decided to take a leap, and I left that. And at that point in time, my priority was to earn some money and buy a car. So I did that, and I took a job in the local magistrate's court office. And I don't really know how or why I ended up there, but it was in the town where I grew up, and there was a local magistrate's court office, and I was one of the assistant clerks. So I was doing things like collecting the fines. When people would go before the magistrate and get fined, they'd come and give their money to me. And also dealing with the maintenance payments, couples who divorced and that kind of thing. So it was at the beginning, it was quite interesting. And I was the youngest person in the office. There was quite a number of people who'd been there for decades. And I remember after a while, as I got to know these people, I would kind of look at them sometimes at the corner of my eye and see myself, potentially where I might be in 20, 30, even more years' time. And I have to say, it was a little bit kind of worrying, I was like, really? Is that the trajectory that I'm on? But on paper, it was a good job. It was giving me enough money, and I was able to buy my first car, and then I was able to move out from my parents' home, which was my next top priority, and rent myself a little bedsit apartment. But as time went on, I'd already developed, I'd noticed that I had an interest in the healing world. And I can't tell you where this came from. I can remember coming across a book, which I think it was a secondhand book, and it was like an encyclopedia of all different kinds of natural medicine. So it's to do with herbal medicine and acupuncture and homeopathy and all these weird and wonderful things which I'd never heard of or had any experience of. I was completely transfixed. And I read this book cover to cover multiple times. So there was obviously something in it for me, it gave me a sense of, I had a much stronger interest in this than anything else that I'd read in a long time. And I can't tell you why, but I decided to follow that interest. So of the chapters that jumped out at me that were particularly interested, I went further. So I started to buy more books on herbal medicine and homeopathy and things like this. These were the ones that particularly interested me at the time. And funnily enough, the secretary to the boss man in the office, one day she caught sight of me reading one of my little books, kind of, in the closet almost. This is my secret hobby. And she said, "Oh, are you interested in homeopathy?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I might be." Hadn't told anybody at this point. And she didn't say anything. She came in the next day and she gifted me a proper homeopathic handbook and a set of homeopathic remedies, which she'd had in her family for I don't know how long. They had cork stoppers. Just give you an idea how old they were. It was like this little antique home remedy kit. And she said, "Here, I'd like you to have these." I thought, well, how likely is that? That I didn't even know that anybody else who'd even heard of homeopathy at that point in time. It wasn't particularly widely known, certainly not where I was living in the north of England. So I got a glimpse of something at that point, which was that when you start to follow your own heart, your own passion, your own path, it's almost as if help appears that you didn't know was available to you. And that would be just an example of that. Suddenly, you know, apparently random encounter, and the person says, oh, here's another piece that might be helpful. And there was a whole series of these that unfolded over time, which led me to a point where eventually I trained to be a homeopathic practitioner. I ended up running my own homeopathy training school. And, you know, it became a big part of my life's work for the first half of my life. Now, when I got to about age 20, so I've been doing this job for 4 years. And by the way, about every 6 to 9 months, I decided that I was going to quit because my heart wasn't really in it. And without me saying anything about that, I was just kind of building up the courage to do it. The boss would invariably take me aside and tell me that he's decided to promote me. And I was like, oh, darn, you know. And I'd get promoted and I'd be given a bit more responsibility and quite a bit more money. And I thought, well, maybe it's not so bad. I'll stay here a bit longer. And this pattern continued for four years. And I ended up in charge of a whole department, which was ridiculous. You know, I was barely out of my teens. And I was now running the office with people there who were, you know, old enough to be my parents. And I didn't even feel worthy of, you know, the position that he was promoting me to. But what I didn't know was that the boss had decided that I would make a good lawyer. And at that time, you could be paid. And whilst you were being paid to do your job, you would actually be given time out to train as either a solicitor or as a barrister. So this was his kind of secret plan for me. And at one point, you know, coincidental with my last promotion, he said, oh, by the way, you'll be starting your training, you know, in September. Which route do you want to take? Do you want to be a barrister or do you want to be a solicitor? You know, those were my options. I was like, oh, God, well, neither really, you know. I said, just let me think about it for a little while. And I didn't need to really think about it because I already knew that I didn't want to do either of those things. And yet it was hard to justify, you know. Through the eyes of my, you know, my parents' generation, I'd landed a dream job and it had prospects and it had a career path. It had job security, which was very important to my parents. You know, if you find a job that you can stay in for the bigger part of your working life, that's great. And even had a pension at the end. You know, I was paying into a pension every month. So on paper, it was, you know, it ticked all the boxes. And my parents had forgiven me for dropping out of school you know, quickly, too early, because now I was on this career path and I was going to get to be, you know, trained and paid at the same time. How cool is that? But my heart wasn't in it. So again, this was a time for me. It was a real kind of, I felt like it was a test of what are you going to listen to? You know, what are you going to pay attention to here? What looks good on paper and what everybody else seems to think is a good idea for you? Or what is it that you're really interested in? What is it that has got some juice in it for you personally? And it was a no-brainer, you know, it was very clear to me. And so I asked the boss for an interview, an appointment. And I went to him and I said, you know what, I've decided to resign. And I want to tell you now before you start, you know, taking me out and having me trained, because it would probably be a bigger deal if I left it a few more years. And you know, he got very quiet and reflective. And he said, well, I'm really sorry to see you go. You know, you've been a real asset, and I could see that you would have made a good lawyer. He said, but I really respect you for being honest with me, and I wish you well. And that was that. And I was like, oh, you know, I felt like a sack of rocks had been cast off my shoulders, and I was free. And basically, I worked my month's notice, and I got my final paycheck, and that was it. And I didn't know what I was going to do exactly next, but I knew I had a sense at least of what I was interested in. And I thought, well, I'm just going to follow my own interest. And that's exactly what I did. But for me, it was, you know, people look, when I look back at that time, I remember people telling me, oh, you were so brave. to do that. You know, it looked like a courageous thing to do. And yet actually it didn't feel like that at all to me. It felt like in some sense just the obvious thing to do, because the alternative was not attractive to me. You know, it's like, am I going to stay in this job and end up like one of the people that I was working alongside? Not all, but several of whom were clearly not particularly fulfilled. You know, they were going about their daily work, but there was a sense of being kind of resigned to what they were doing. And I saw that that was one life possibility that was on for me, but I saw that also it wasn't the only one, and it wasn't even the necessary one. So I somehow giving myself permission to follow that inner knowing at that early in my life, in a way, it set the stage for, you know, the rest of my life in terms of how it's unfolded since. Because whenever I've come up against what looks like a critical junction, you know, what are you going to do? Which way are you going to go? I've got that to fall back on. And what I know from that experience is that when you follow that inner guidance, that inner wisdom, things work out. And they don't just work out in a okay way. They work out way better than you could ever have imagined. And you get to meet all kinds of interesting people who are in alignment with your life's path at that point in time. You get all kinds of help and support. You find yourself in situations which, yes, they're challenging, but it's the right kind of challenge for you. So you're up for it. You know, it stretches you in the right places that you need to develop yourself. And so I've absolutely no regrets whatsoever. And for me, what I see often is that young people nowadays they're up against the same thing that I was up against, maybe even more so, which is a lot of other people's ideas as to what they should be doing with their life, first of all. And that's tricky to navigate, especially if you've got people who've been successful, like maybe your parents, you know, one or both of your parents were very successful in a particular path. And it makes sense to them to encourage you to go down that path, you know, and maybe they can help you because they know about that. But what if it's not your path? Which it often isn't. It might be, but it often isn't. In which case, you're going to be living in some sense, a compromised life. You know, you're going to be living in someone else's shadow, and you're going to be living out someone else's idea of what it is that you're here to do. And one of the things that I like to just sort of pose as a question is, well, what would you do with your life if you really knew for sure that there wasn't anything that you have to do? You know, just to sit with that and just to reflect on it. If you could just let go of all ideas from other people and even from yourself as to what you think that you have to do, where would you be without any of that? What would you be left with? And in a sense, that's the position I put myself in. You know, when I walked out of that job, I couldn't see what I was going to be doing next. So I was effectively unemployed for a while. And then I went and worked on a fruit farm because I thought, well, why not? That would be a fun thing to do in the summer, which it was. And what I was doing was I was giving myself that internal space that I needed at that time just to get really clear, and then to kind of see where the breadcrumb trail was. You know, where is it that I'm going to go next with this? And I think that for some people, some youngsters these days, the gap year can serve that function. You know, you take a gap year and you see it as an opportunity to just take stock, which I would say is a wise thing to do. You know, if you're feeling like there's some sense of pressure and I need to decide and I have to know, you know, I need to know what it is I'm going to do, because doing that is going to lead to that, and is going to lead to that. And somehow it looks like your whole life depends on what you decide now. And I see a lot of youngsters get burdened by that, you know, that feeling of pressure. It's I've got to decide what A levels I'm going to do, because that determines what degree I'm going to do, and that will determine my career. And they feel overwhelmed by it, quite understandably. I would too. And I think one of the things I want to say to that is that you don't have to know ahead of time where it's leading. In fact, you can't really know. I didn't know. I don't think anybody truly knows, even people who are really following their own gravitational pull, what in whatever direction it's taking them. They don't know the ultimate outcome of where it's leading. Nobody does. But what you do get to see is you get a sense of what your own, I don't even want to call it life's purpose. Let me call it your life's interest. You get at least to see some of that. Not all of it necessarily, but you get to see that there's something in life, in your life, which is already visible to you to some degree, that you're more interested in than everything else. And I would say that's a good starting place for anybody. I just happened to be interested in something which seemed a bit weird, even to me. I don't know why I was interested in herbal medicine and trees and plants and stuff like that as a teenager. I really don't. But I knew I was. And I was never more happy than just when I was out in nature, in the woods. And then when I started to learn that all of these things that were in nature were medicines, that was really exciting to me to discover. And that there was an ancient tradition of knowledge and wisdom that was somehow embodied in these plants and trees. I was just fascinated by that. Now, I can't tell you why. It wasn't that one of my parents was a herbalist or something, not at all. They thought it was weird too. And, in their mind, working in the office situation was a much more kind of reasonable and rational thing to do. So here's the thing about wisdom. It's tricky. It often defies logic, your own and other people's. Yeah. And I've come to see that that's often one of the ways that it is wisdom because it defies logic. It doesn't necessarily stack up on paper. It's not necessarily the most logical thing for you to do at this point in time. And yet there's a deeper logic, if you like. When you're tapping into wisdom, you're following a deeper logic, which it's not the one that's necessarily followed by the crowd, and it's not the one that always makes sense financially, or in terms of being successful by the criteria that we normally measure success by, outward success. The other thing about wisdom, nobody can give it to you. It's not the same as good advice. You can't Google it, which is a bummer, because we think we can Google anything nowadays and find the answer. And, there's a lot of things you can Google and find the answer. That's true. You can look on YouTube and find, someone will explain to you how to do exactly what you want to do right now. If you want to fix some appliance in your house or something like that, you can find some guy somewhere who's already made a video of how to do it. Now, that's great. That's helpful. It's not wisdom, though. Wisdom is not learned knowledge, and it's not knowledge that's shared from an outward source. It's an inner knowing that something is right for you at a given moment in your life. And it could also be an inner knowing that something isn't right for you. Equally helpful. I looked up the definition of wisdom. Of course, it's connected to the word wise. And it's a very old term, not just in the English language, but there's equivalent term in the Germanic and the Nordic languages. And it's interesting, that term, because it has to do with things like using discrimination and discernment and having sound judgment and so on. But it's also got a deeper meaning, which has to do with to see or know the way. I didn't know that to be wise actually has that as part of its dictionary definition, to see or know the way. But I love that to me is exactly what following your own wisdom is about, is you seeing or knowing what's the way for you at a given moment in your life. And one of the important things to recognize with that is that it only comes on a kind of need to know basis, as far as I can tell. So you don't get the whole shebang. This is exactly what your life path is going to look like until the day you die. You don't get anything like that, the fullness of that. What you get is, this is the next step for you. This is the person to speak to. This is the book to read. This is the decision to take today. But you're not given at that moment you're not given what the results of that decision will be. That's in the realm of unknown. So this is one of the peculiar things about wisdom, is that it requires you to act on something internal without knowing necessarily what it's leading to. And I've only really become, I suppose, more aware of that. That's one of the characteristics of wisdom, you know, with what we call the wisdom of hindsight. When you kind of look back, I didn't know that as a young boy, but I became a keen student of Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell was him following his wisdom led him into the field of mythology. He was a student of all the myths and legends of the world. He just became fascinated as a boy, first of all with tales of the North American, Native Americans and Indians, cowboys and Indians was his fascination as a youngster. And then he realized, oh my God, there's a whole tradition here that he didn't even know about. And then even bigger than that, oh, that tradition, which is ancient, seems to be saying a lot of the things that this other tradition are also saying, but they're saying it in a different way. So he was one of the people who really, in a way, invented the field of comparative mythology, where you could start to see that there are underlying threads. Now, I remember one of the things that I read in one of Joseph Campbell's works many, many years ago. And one of his favorite stories, which he claimed was one of the most important stories for us in the West, was the King Arthur stories, the stories of the Grail, the Holy Grail and the quest for the Grail, which were written in the 13th century, in medieval times. But he said that no, these are super relevant for us today. And there was a particular piece that he pulled out of one of those stories, which I'd just like to share with you, because when I read this subsequently, I thought, oh my God, that's so true. And it confirmed to me what I already had come to see, which was really helpful. So the story goes that King Arthur and his knights, they're seated at the round table. And the Holy Grail, which we're not told what it is exactly, but it appears somehow, this apparition of the Holy Grail happens. But it's covered by this great radiant sort of velvet cloth. So they all know that they've had a visitation from the Holy Grail, but they didn't get to see it. And then it disappears. And Gawain, who's one of the knights, who I think was the nephew of King Arthur, he immediately proposes that all the knights at the table, they should go on a quest to find the Holy Grail unveiled, like to see it in its true splendor, as it were. And they all agree, what a great idea, and off they go. Now, Campbell says, here's the bit of the text that interested me. And the text reads, they thought it would be, this is the original from the 13th century, they thought it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group. Each entered the forest adventurous at the point that he himself had chosen, where it was darkest and there was no way or path. Now, isn't that interesting? Campbell said that that's such a significant piece in the whole story and also in our life story, because what is it saying? It's saying, if you go together as a group, you're going to be influenced by the group, and you're going to be following a path that's well trodden, essentially, which is, again, means you're not listening to your own inner guidance, your own inner wisdom. But if you enter the forest at a place of your own choosing, where you've never been before and neither has anybody else, because there's no path, well, what does that mean? That means you've got to literally create the path as you go along. And it's yours. It's uniquely yours. And that's where that's where the fulfillment is to be found. And the richest kind of life experience that's available to all of us, that's how we find that, by literally carving our own path through the forest, even though we can't see where it's leading. So that to me is one of the features of following your own wisdom, is that even to me to this day, I'm in my 50s now, and it still feels like that. Like I'm entering the dark forest and I don't know where it's going. I can't tell you what I'll be doing next year in terms of my life and my work. I really can't, maybe even in 6 months' time. It's so fluid. And in many respects unpredictable. But I love that about it. And I've really come to appreciate that keeps life very interesting for me, and very rich, and also challenging. But it also means that I'm required to get comfortable with that not knowing. And I would say that that's the only real obstacle to people not following the wisdom, really. I mean, part of it is just getting, paying too much attention to the external noise. So you've got to be willing to give yourself that space where you can listen into yourself. But the other piece to it is also that being able to sit with not knowing and be comfortable with that. Yeah. So it's a peculiar thing, because on one sense, you can have an inner certainty. This is right for me. I was very clear that I needed to quit that job at 20 years old. There was no real question. I had doubts. Okay. So I want to clarify what I'm saying here. It's normal to have doubts, but I still knew for sure that it was right for me to quit. So that knowing, when I'm talking about following wisdom, you're not listening to just recycled thoughts that are going round and round in your head. It's more of a bodily felt sensation. We call it a gut instinct, or you know it in your bones, or you might say your heart just told you that this was right for you. In my case, at that point, all I knew for sure that was my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't in the career path that seemed to be getting laid out for me. I knew that. So even if you don't know what to do, you might at least know what not to do. That's a good start. Start there. It's really helpful if you get clear on what isn't right for you at a given moment. You know, you find yourself in some situation and you just know that that's not it, or that it was it, but it's not anymore. You know, it's served its purpose for you and it's time to move on. If you know that, if you have that sense, you might be required to take the leap before you're shown what's coming next. That's been a very characteristic feature of my journey, is that I've often been nudged over the edge. And it's only when I've been willing to take the leap that then the next piece becomes clear to me. And often we think that we need the other piece, we need the second piece first, as it were. So you show me what I'm leading towards. You show me where this is going, where this path is leading, and then I'll consider walking down it. Well, no, wisdom doesn't seem to work that way, as far as I can tell. It requires you to follow what you've already been given. Act on that first. And it might be just a small step initially, but each time you take a step in that direction, the next piece unfolds, and then the next, and then the next. That's what I found. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's been, yes, exactly my experience too. And for example, doing this series of live events, I had been for over a year apparently doing nothing, doing lots of gardening and really loving being out in the garden and seeing and getting things to grow and learning all about permaculture and learning all sorts of things, just following what I felt like doing. And in the back of my mind thinking, I'm sure I should be doing something else around the 3 principles or around, but not listening to any of that, what I should be doing. Yeah. Okay. And then one morning I just woke up and it was like, this is what you've got to do. I'm like, okay. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. And as you say, just waited for each step to come. And still, I don't know what the outcome of it's going to be in the long run. I mean, I've got all sorts of ideas about where it's going to go and what I'm going to do with it. But I don't know. But I'm just enjoying doing it and enjoying the conversations and listening, having people on and talking like this is lovely.
Yeah. It's a great example, Anne, and look, just look at already you've created something which so many people have just said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll participate with you. And it takes on a momentum, a life of its own, which is, you start to realize I'm not really in charge of this. I'm kind of following it.
Totally. Yeah. It's like, no, the days when I feel like there have been that's the amazing thing as well, because it's taking up most of my day, well, all of my day, nearly every day.
I can imagine.
And but at the same time, I don't feel like I'm working because I'm really enjoying it. It doesn't feel like work. It just feels like fun. And I tried to take a day off the other day. It was very funny. I tried to make myself take a day off and do what I should do on a day off, right? And within about half an hour, I'd come back to doing it again because it was more fun doing this than it was doing what I thought I should be doing.
Right.
Very funny.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Yeah, but I definitely know I'm not in charge. And some days it feels like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? And then I just, as soon as I recognize that I'm just listening to all of that thought, I think, oh, it'll work out. And it does. But at that age, when I was at school, I didn't listen so much to my wisdom. I think I had this idea that I needed to, I should be helping people, and I should be saving the world, and I should be doing this. And part of that was, it was difficult. It wasn't easy for me to work out what was my heart and what was, the shoulds. But you can't go wrong, can you? You follow whatever you follow, and then there's still chance for that to change.
Absolutely, at any point in time. And I think we're always course correcting as we go through life anyway. So you're right in that sense. We can't go wrong. But I think that we can have different kinds of life experience depending on the degree to which we do listen and tune in and follow that inner guidance. So, even if we seem to go off track, it's going to lead somewhere. And at a certain point, you'll start to see that apparent deviation in your track, it led you back to the place where you're supposed to be now. And, in a funny kind of way, you start to appreciate, oh, it wasn't even a mistake, there was value in that. I can see that there was value in me doing that work at age, 16 to 20. First of all, I got the homeopathy kit and the book. I mean, that was kind of interesting, that of all the unlikely places. And then also being put in a situation where I was almost sort of required to turn down something that looked like a good, safe career path. I can see that was really good training for me. I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity. So had I not taken the career path in the first place, I would never have been given that challenge. If I'd just kind of dropped out of school and somehow found my way to doing homeopathy, that would have been okay too. But I'm actually really grateful that I was offered something. It was almost like being given the temptation, It's like, more money, Ian, nice car, Ian, pension, Ian. I was like, really? Pension? I'm not even 20 years old. I had no interest in pension whatsoever. And yet people were kind of dangling it in front of me as if it was something I should be interested in. So
I remember at the end of my first term at medical school, I was so fed up. I went home to my parents. I just hated the whole system. It just wasn't me. And I went home to my parents and I said, right, that's it. I'm not going back. I'm going to India to be a yogi. And I was dead serious about it. But at the time, I had absolutely no idea. I mean, these days, there was no internet. I had no idea how to do it. But I was really into yoga and into meditation and things like that all through my teens. And so I thought, it just came to me, I'm going to India to be a yogi. But unfortunately, I didn't follow that at the time, and went back to medical school and continued and finished my degree and became a doctor. But that's something else, is that part of me believed that at that time that you have to finish what you start. You have to finish what you start, and you've got to, otherwise, that it was a bad thing to stop and give up, which I don't believe now. Now I do follow what my heart is saying rather than what I should be doing and so on. And that was, but at the same time, again, I don't regret that, because I learned a lot of things. I met a lot of people, and it all, as you say, it always takes you back. It always takes you back in the end anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, even in the things that we didn't follow, it's almost like the seeds were sown, that seed of an interest in yoga and, whatever it was that you saw in India as a, you know, just a seed of possibility, somehow that it stays with you. And I think sometimes it just, you know, it's almost like the seed got sown in a place where it couldn't grow at that moment, but it's still there in seed form. And then at a different point in your life, very often I've seen this happen, is that suddenly that thing gets activated again, you know, and you recognize it. It's the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's the same interest I had when I was 20, when I was 15, when I was 30. It's that again. It didn't go away. You know, I thought I'd blown it, but no, it's still here, and maybe in a different form now. That interest will get expressed in a different form, but you start to realize it's the same thing. It's coming from the same source within you.
Yes, totally. Even when I qualified as a doctor, I knew that something was missing in what I'd learned and what I'd been taught, that there was definitely more of a spiritual and psychological, emotional nature to what was going wrong with people in their bodies that was just completely being missed out in what we've been taught at medical school. So that sort of took me in that direction of looking and searching for what that was about. And it took me a long time. And in fact, it wasn't until I came across the 3 principles after I'd retired and after I'd given up all of that, that I realized that that was what I had been looking for. The understanding was, which includes this, obviously. Yeah. So what happened to you after you said you became a homeopathist and you ran your own school and so on? So what happened then?
Well, I mean, even that was a whole journey. Like you, I was also interested in a kind of spiritual path, and I was getting more and more interested in. I was reading things like Krishnamurti and things of that kind, you know, philosophy and spiritual writings, because I was kind of searching for something in here, and I wasn't finding it out there, you know. And I heard that Krishnamurti was coming to do some talks in Hampshire. He had this place called Brockwood Park where he came and did public talks once a year. And I hitched all the way down. I hitchhiked, took a tent, and I went and camped out there in the pouring rain and listened to him give these talks. And he was way over my head. I knew he was brilliant, but I had no idea what he was talking about. But again, here's the funny thing. So at that point, I was feeling maybe a little bit lost. I was in between, you know, having left my job and haven't really kind of landed in terms of what I'm doing next. And it rained so hard that there were these guys in the field who couldn't get their car out. They had one of those Citroens with the narrow wheels, and the wheels were spinning. And I just spontaneously offered to help them, give them a push. So I pushed them out the field, and as a thank you, they said, well, we're going down to the pub in the nearby village to get something to eat. Do you want to come with us? I said, sure. So I'd never spoken to these guys before, and I got in the car with them. And when we got to the pub, we got out of the car, and the guy takes off his jacket, and he's wearing a sweatshirt that says College of Homeopathy. And I was like, there's a College of Homeopathy? I had no idea. Like you said, there was no internet at that point in time. I thought all the books I had were written previous century. I thought that it was something that people used to do years ago, but I didn't know that there was a college you could actually train in this stuff. And I almost like jumped on this guy. It's like, there's a college? Where is it? How do I get there? He said, yeah, it's in London. I've been studying there for the last year or two. That was it. I was moving to London. You know, it was immediate. From kind of drifting and not knowing what I was doing. I was still living up in Yorkshire in the north of England. That was it. I'm moving to London. And everybody's like, well, Ian, London's a big deal. You know, you've got to have somewhere to live. I don't care. I'm just going. And that's what I did. I literally went to London and I signed up for this homeopathy training program. So that, again, that to me was an example of how, even when you think you're a bit lost, there are recognizable signposts every step of the way. And how do you recognize them? You recognize them because it hits you, it strikes you. It's like a resonance with something. As soon as that guy took his jacket off, I saw his sweatshirt. I was like, that's for me. You know, it could have been a neon sign, you know, attached to his shirt. It was like, that was so clearly for me and not for anybody else. And I think that we don't see those things because they're invisible to us because we're so preoccupied. But I've come to realize that it's always there. There's always outer reflections of our own inner journey if we've got the eyes to see it. There are certain, I've been in bookstores where literally I've had a book fall off and hit me on the shoulder as I've been walking through. I've been heading towards one department and I've accidentally brushed past something and a book came off and hit me on the shoulder and it's like, oh my God, that's the book I need to buy. And I've bought the book and I've taken it home and it's changed my life in some way. It's happened to me numerous times. So for me, this following wisdom also is learning to recognize the signposts that are for you. And when I got involved in the homeopathic field, it was like coming home to something that I already knew. I had this deep familiarity with it, which I can't explain. It was like, the other day I was watching, there's some young lad who I think he lived in Norfolk, and they give him a paint set when he's like 3 or 4 years old. And by age 6, he's selling his work. And he's now, I think, 19 or 20. He's made 3 million quid from his work already. He's like Matisse. He's like an English Matisse or something like this. And his parents are like, we don't know where that came from. We just knew that he loved to paint. So they encouraged him in what he loved to do. Thank God, great, well done, parents. not trying to persuade him to be a banker or something like that. They saw that he just had an interest in messing about with paint, so they just let him do that. And then lo and behold, he starts producing stuff. So for me, my interest was in that field and I felt very at home there. But then interesting thing happened. I was about halfway through my training and a guest teacher came over from the States. And because he was kind of a well-known figure and he'd never been over to the UK before, I was asked if I'd like to be the video operator. We got this old video camera and I was going to video him on using this big VHS thing. And I said, oh yeah, great. So I got to hang out with him a bit and he starts talking and I'm running the camera and I'm not even listening to what he's saying. I'm just looking and thinking, oh my God, I want his job. That was what struck me within the first 10 minutes. It's like, oh, I want to teach. I'd never had that thought before. There's nobody's teacher in my, my family, my relatives. I'd never thought about teaching. I was learning to practice, I was studying to be a practitioner. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh no, I want to teach like this guy teaches. It hit me. And so it changed the direction I completed my training and everything, but no sooner had I finished my training, I started running classes. I just wanted to teach people. And then the classes led to me opening a training school. And it was all just very natural and very organic because again, I was just following that inner, I recognized that there was something there for me and I just acted on it basically. And I didn't listen to like you said, you get the doubts and you get the shoulds and you get, what do I know about teaching? Maybe I should do teacher training or something. I remember one day I was giving a workshop and this lady came up to me in the break. She said, have you ever done teacher training? I said, no. She said, don't. She said, I've worked in teacher training for years. She said, you don't need it. Just carry on doing what you're doing. And I was so grateful. I was like, oh, that's cool. It hadn't even occurred to me that I should, the teacher training was a necessary thing to do. But there were moments when I thought probably I should learn how to do it properly. She was basically saying, look, you're doing fine. Just do what you're doing. So again, there was like a thread there for me of the training aspect, the teaching and helping other people to not to copy what I was doing, but to find their own way of conveying something. That's what I was interested in. So I got really fascinated by the whole journey that we go on when you become a student of something and you're looking to be a practitioner of it, whatever it happens to be. There's an unlearning that has to happen. You have to let go of a lot of ideas as to what you think it requires of you and how you think you should do it and how other people are doing it. It's easy to get distracted by all of that, and yet there's only one authentic way that will really work well for each of us, as far as I can tell. Doesn't matter what field you're working in. So I got really interested in that, like the practitioner development side. And I started to see that really it was a personal development training. You know, it wasn't about the skill set of homeopathy that was particularly interesting to me. It was the bringing forth of someone's inner potential. And that just happened to be the vehicle that I was working in at that time. So once I recognized that, I got to carry that forward. Even when I left the homeopathic field, I got more interested in the psychological and emotional aspects of health. And that led me away from the homeopathic field and into the psychological field. So then I became a student again, and I started studying many forms of psychology and self-help, different forms of emotional healing work, working with people's beliefs and dreams and all kinds of stuff. And that eventually led me to the three principles understanding in the beginning of 2011, which I recognized as having, having come that far, I immediately recognized the truth of it, but also I loved the simplicity of it. I saw that there was something here that was so affirming to me of what I already knew, but it just distilled it down to the bare bones essence, which I love, because I'd always been looking for what was both simple as well as practically helpful, not just for others, but for myself as well. And this understanding that we talk about here, which goes under the name of the three principles or the inside out understanding, to me, it's just a very, very shorthand way of helping people to get a handle on how their experience is getting created, so that they're not too distracted by unnecessary noise, internal noise mostly, but also external. But it also helps you to, I found it helps people to get a deep appreciation that they do have their own wisdom, and that it has been guiding them all along, often in ways that they haven't come to recognize. A lot of my one-to-one work with people is pointing out to them where they have been following their own wisdom. They just didn't see it as such. They thought it was just random happenstance that they ended up doing this instead of that. When I kind of pin them down and say, well, wait a minute, how did that really happen? And they tell a story which is their version of my story, Oh, well, I was doing this and this, but then I bumped into this person and they gave me this book, and that led and again, I have to pin them down. I say, well, how did you know to follow that? And they kind of struggle to answer at first because they haven't really thought about it. It just seemed like an obvious thing to do, is often what people will say to me. And yet there's a clue in that, I find, because wisdom is often pointing us to what is the obvious next thing to do. But because it's obvious, we don't see it as wisdom. We overlook the value of it.
Something that just came to my mind was, I've been hearing a lot in this last day or two from people who I'm involved with in a different project about feeling burned out. So they're doing what they think they need to do to be successful, to have a good business, to run what they enjoy doing, but they're getting burned out. Mm. And so it seems to me that in that they're missing wisdom somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I've been there, so I can speak from experience. I got burnt out towards the end of my homeopathic work. And I remember very distinctly, I was working one day with a client and the window cleaner came. And he kind of gave me a wave, and he's cleaning the windows. I'm sat with a client. And I remember looking at this guy, and he looked so happy and carefree. And I thought, oh my God, I want his job. That's how I knew I was burnt out, And then I realized very quickly, no, I don't want his job. I want how he seems to feel, how it looks to me that he feels relative to how I'm feeling, which is burdened, So then I had to kind of make that conscious, like, well, what is it that's actually weighing me down? And for me at that point in time, it was a feeling that I was responsible for the outcomes for other people. I'd somehow taken that on, which is a common problem for anybody who's in a helping role, is that you start to take on that you personally are responsible for the outcome. that happens for the people that you're working with, which is ludicrous. How can you be responsible for that? They don't even know what the outcome is going to be. How can you even know? We're certainly not in charge of it, but I felt like I was. And the other thing that was burdening me was that there was a lot of things that went with that role that I thought I had personally had to do. And I hadn't realized that I could actually either let someone else do them or just not do them. You know, like, for example, I thought I had to be available on the phone, you know, pretty much the whole time. And then I realized, actually, you don't have to be. You could just say that you're not available. What, you know, if people really need help, they'll find it somewhere else. And so that was me learning to trust not only my own, but other people's wisdom. Turns out they have it too, you know. But the other, so I think a big piece of the burnout thing is where people are getting caught in attachment to certain outcomes, or taking it personally. You know, somehow you've made it personal. It's about, we make it about us. So we think that it really matters, that things that, you know, that either that we do certain things, that it's really crucial somehow that we keep doing certain things, or that we do it in a certain way, or that we think it matters that the outcome is of a certain kind. So it's a peculiar thing, because what I had to learn was that you can still give it your best shot. You can do your best work without any attachment to outcome. I had to learn that. And that meant that I could, you know, I could be really fully present with my clients. I could do the best work that I could do. But when I walked out of that office, I never thought about them again. It was finished, you know, till the next time I saw them, which was completely different for me. I used to be still thinking about them over dinner and at night. And, you know, I was still carrying people in my own mind, thinking that that was necessary and helpful. I had to see that it wasn't. So that's what was taking a toll on me.
It's funny because last year, before I even started this project, I can't imagine why I did it if it wasn't just following wisdom. Because last year, about the same time, I did a week of live interviews on Facebook. Similar sort of thing, but just for a week, and one or two. I was absolutely, completely frazzled by the end of it. And that was just a week. And this time I'm doing 2 months of it. And yet this time I'm really calm. And
okay. So what's the difference?
The difference is because I'm not listening to all, like you said, I'm not listening to the thinking that you've got to do this and you've got to do it that way and you've got to do. Well, that doesn't stop those thoughts coming sometimes. But I just know, as you said, I know that I'm not in charge. That's the main thing, is I know I'm not in charge, yeah. and I'm not in control, and that the life force, whatever it is that you call it, that is living through me and having this experience is controlling it all. It's not me. That's so it. I don't have to be taking that responsibility.
Yeah, that's it. It's that I think once you get a sense of that, oh, actually there's something that's way more intelligent than I am, that's running the whole show, including my little bit part in it. It'll run this part of the show perfectly well if I let it, and you get to relax.
Yeah.
Around it, you can be doing exactly the same role as you were doing before, but you get to relax, and you don't get to have that feeling of it being stressful or burdensome.
No, it becomes a game. It becomes a game then, instead of it's much more fun.
Exactly. There's a lightness to it. That to me is the difference. And when you were talking, that's what I saw in your description. You get to be light around it. And it doesn't mean that you can't still really commit yourself to it and do your best work. In some sense, you do better work, I think, without that burden. But that lightheartedness to me has become a kind of yardstick. I notice much sooner now if it's getting heavy, if it's feeling heavy for me, then I know that I'm adding something to it that is not necessary, that is made up. And I just need to see it for what it is.
And I agree with you that that looking out for those clues is so much fun. I love looking out for that's another one. That's another clue. It's really.
And they're everywhere, right?
Yep.
They're everywhere. Well, it's just a question of having the eyes to see them and to realize that they're tailor-made for you. You show it to your friend, they think, what are you on about?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense to them, but for you, it's something that jumped out at you. You know that's for you. Yeah.
Yeah, which gets a bit confusing sometimes. Sometimes if you're doing a course, because to learn the technical side of doing things, we do courses like you did, like you learned, you did your course for homeopathy and things. The difference is in learning, okay, so these are the things that other people have done, but you don't have to then, once you've got all the information, you don't then have to follow everything that everybody else did. Your wisdom will show you which bits are for you.
Yeah, it's the starting point. It's just, it gives you something to get going with, but you're right, you're not bound by that. Yeah, you don't have to be bound by it. And I saw that when I was working training practitioners, is that people would get bound by the training that they'd done. They felt boxed in by it. And of course, they had to then somehow, shake that off, which feels a little bit unnerving at first because it looks like your teachers know better than you. So I should probably just do what they've recommended. When we're feeling insecure, that always looks like a better option, to do what someone else with a bit more experience or a bit more authority has already done. But wisdom is not the same as learned knowledge. It's not to say learned knowledge is without value, because it does have a value, but it can only take you so far. And then the wisdom piece is what really makes it your own. It's what gives you your own unique expression, which is to me, that's where the deep fulfillment comes from, is finding your own unique expression and being willing to walk on that razor edge of really not knowing what the hell you're doing most of the time. But you kind of know that this is at least good enough for today. Yeah, that's it.
That's lovely. So what are you doing now, Ian?
Right now, about half an hour, I'm going to have a call with my business partner, Elizabeth Lovius. We're working on all kinds of projects together. Elizabeth worked in the corporate field before coming to this, so she and we collaborate now on some corporate work and also on a well-being practitioner training program, which is great fun. I do another program with my colleague and friend Carol Burrows called A Journey to Wholeness, which is a kind of deep dive experiential 9-month learning journey for all of us, which is fantastic. I collaborate with another friend, Claire Tanner, who I'm sure you know, down in Devon. We do a program together called Natural Wisdom, looking at the parallels between the natural world and our own inner world and how that wisdom is manifest in both. So that's great fun. Looking forward to seeing Claire again in a couple of weeks. And before that, I'm going to Bulgaria next week, doing a workshop in Bulgaria with a translator. I've been going there for quite a few years. And, that's my work. It's this afternoon, I've got a session with someone over in the US. So I'll be using the Zoom technology to do a session. I love the variety of it now. And I love the fact that, as I said to you, I honestly don't know what it will look like next year, because it's changed so much and so quickly in the last couple of years. All kinds of pieces have come into play that literally weren't on my radar at all before then. For me, it's the same work essentially, but the form of it just keeps growing and developing and changing. And I love that. Keeps it fresh and interesting.
Yes, that's so. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, the links to what you're doing, where they can find you and so on, are all on the website at thesecretofeverything.com. So there's a whole page about you and they can find the links to you.
Great,
if they want to get
you.
in touch. They can also put questions underneath the video. If they're watching on replay, you can put questions underneath and I will pass them on to Ian and he'll get back to you.
Yeah, happy to respond.
Oh, so that's been really good fun. Thank you very much, Ian. It's been lovely.
Been my pleasure, Anne. Thanks for doing what you're doing, and glad I was able to join you today.
Thank you very much. So bye everyone for now.
Thank you.